All right, we are talking about the parts of a sine and cosine graph. So we're familiar with this unit circle here, this thing right here. We're familiar slightly with that. And you know that this is 0 degrees or 360. But we are going to be doing, as you can see here, these are radians. And when we're graphing, we're going to stick to radians. So this one is 0 radians and 2 pi radians. And remember, when we do this, we count by pi over 2's. So this spot right here is pi over 2. This is 2 pi over 2, which is the same as pi. Oops. I don't know what's happening right now. I'm dying. Okay, this one that's pi. This is 3 pi over 2. And we know that, and then this is 4 pi over 2. And that's that. So these points, the coordinates we know correspond to cosine is x, and sine is y. So the coordinates here are 1, 0, 0, 1, negative 1, 0, and 0, negative 1. So if we were to take this, instead of saying we're just using x's and y's, or sine and cosine, to make this unit circle, if we instead said the degrees or the angles here. So this angle right here is 0, that's right here. Okay, and if I was graphing sine, the sine of 0 is 0. If I look up here, pi over 2, that's right here. So pi over 2, the sine of pi over 2 is 1. So what we're doing is we're like unwinding the graph so that we can see over angles what the sine is and over angles what the cosine is. So we are discussing sine just by itself without cosine involved, in essence. So if we look at pi over here, we know that pi, the sine of pi is 0. We know the sine of 3 pi over 2 is negative 1. And then it just keeps going. That's why when I was doing this, I was talking about these critical points here that kind of shape the graph. Okay, those 5 critical points, the 0, pi over 2, 2 pi over 2, 3 pi over 2, and 4 pi over 2, those are our critical 5 points that form our sine wave. Okay, and they have specific qualities. Now, cosine is similar. I'm just going to switch colors for cosine. Let's make it that color. Cosine of 0 is 1. Cosine of pi over 2 is 0. And you can see how they're very close graphs. They're very similar to each other, but they're off. They're like almost shoved over. The same graph, but shoved over a little bit. 5 pi over 2 would be that one. Okay? So these are our basic cosine graphs, and this is where they come from, where the x-axis is our angles, and our y-axis is our sine or cosine, depending on what you're graphing. So those are our basic sine and cosine graphs. They have certain characteristics that we need to keep track of, and these are them to begin with. We have our midline, which is simply the vertical shift. The midline, if you look at the regular graph, where can I look at? Hold on, sorry about that. We can look at this bottom graph here. Okay. All right, so this bottom graph here is what I'm looking at. I'm gonna kill my thumb. What's going on there? There we go. So this is our basic sine graph that we're looking at. The midline is right in the middle. There's the same amount of graph above it as below, so that's what we call our midline. If you can't figure it out or if it's confusing, the formula is max plus min divided by 2. So it's just like an average of the 2 points. The amplitude is simply from the midline to the highest point, this distance. So in this case, it's 1, obviously, and if you can't figure it out, it's max minus min divided by 2. The period is how long it takes to make one complete cycle. So a complete cycle, and that's key, is these 5 points. Those 5 points are one complete cycle. So we'll say write 5 points on here so you can remember that. And that's regular basic sine graph that doesn't do anything. Its period is 2 pi, its amplitude is 1. The domain is everything. Remember, domain is your x values. So with x values, it's how far left to the right, and this guy goes on forever. The range is our lowest value to our highest value. So the lowest value here is -1, and the highest value here is 1. So that's why this is the range. So if you want to think of the range, it's the min value to the max value. And that's where we got these numbers up here also. Okay? Cosine has a very similar graph. But what changes slightly is where it begins. And when I say begins, I mean where it hits the y-axis. Okay? Where does it hit the y-axis? If it hits at the midline here, we're talking sine. Okay, and let's look at the next page. I can do that. It's down here. So this is cosine. So if you're cosine, if you're on the y-axis, you hit at the maximum. It begins at the maximum. So remember, it's on the y-axis that we're talking about, and if it hits at the highest possible value of that graph, it's cosine, right? All the other stuff is the same. Amplitude, period, all that stuff. So what we're going to be doing is looking at different graphs and trying to find these pieces of information. So you may have never done this before, so you got to give yourself half of a break and try and work through this. Okay, so you just think of each piece. So we've got our midline. So our midline is in the middle. Now if you can see that this is the middle, you can see that y equals 1, and remember it has to be an equation, so you always have to put y equals and then the number. Okay, but if you can't figure that out, you can see what the highest value is 3, the lowest value is -1, and it's max plus min divided by 2, and that'll give you your number. So that's 2/2, which is 1. So definitely a possibility. The amplitude is the value or the distance from the midline, which is this, to the highest point. So how far did I go up? I went 1, 2. And this is amplitude. It's always positive. Okay, I got to change colors. I hate writing in red. Okay, so it's always positive, the amplitude. It's like a measure of distance, so it has to be positive. Now, which graph is this? Is this better a sine or cosine? So the way that we look at that, you look at the y-axis. So look at y-axis. Okay, and this is what I was just talking about a second ago. If it hits at the midline, so I've already drawn my midline, and I have my y-axis. If it hits right here at the midline, this is sine. If it hits at the max or the min, it's cosine. Okay. The period is how long it takes to make one cycle, so you have to get those 5 dots. So you get the first one would be on the y-axis, and then you go to the next one, which would be at the max, then at the midline, then at the mid, then at the midline. Those are your 5 points that you're looking for, and then you look down at your x-axis and you say that's pi. Okay? The frequency is 1/pi. It's saying you get one cycle every pi. Yeah, who cares? Anyways, I'm just kidding. I care a little. Any horizontal shift. A horizontal shift saying would basically say it does not hit the y-axis at the max, min, or midline. So it hits at the midline, so no horizontal shift. The domain, remember, domain is always negative to positive infinity. That can't change. But the range is your lowest value, which in this case is -1, to your highest value, which is 3, with brackets. Bam. Okay? So let's run through this one. Find the midline. So this one's might be a little easier because it's right in, starts at 0. So the midline is 1 here. So when we do the midline, always do y equals 1. Amplitude is from the midline to the highest point, so we just go 1. That's not a equation, that's just a distance. Like the highest point goes up 1 from the midline. Is this best cosine or sine? Sine or cosine? So you look at the y-axis. The key here is look at the y-axis. This is the y-axis, and see where it hits. It hits right here. This is hitting at the minimum. Since it hits at the min, it's cosine. So the only time it's a cosine graph when it hits at the min or max, either one. When it hits at the min, that means that there's been a reflection. We're going to talk a little bit about that tomorrow, make it a little bit more clear. But basically it was reflected through the midline because it should start up here, but it got reflected down to there. The period is how long it takes to get those 5 dots. So here are the 5 dots. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I hit it 4, bam. Okay, the frequency is just 1 over the period. Horizontal shift, since it hits at the minimum, no. And then the range is the lowest value, which is 0, to the highest value, which was 2. Okay, we're going to do some practice, but see how you can do, how many you can find for this. Thank you, and have a nice day.